Good day to all of you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather live stream for July 19th, 2026. Welcome in on a Sunday morning. Hope all of you guys are having a great Sunday so far. And we are watching the tropics closely as things have taken a turn, I should say. Things have quite significantly, rapidly uptrended in the last few hours, I should say. We went from Invest 91L being designated yesterday to it having a solid chance of development to today, Tropical Depression 2 has formed in the Gulf. And it really just goes to show just how quickly sometimes things are able to get their act together in the Gulf. And I think there is a pretty good reason to believe that Tropical Depression 2 could be of a potential sizable concern for the Gulf Coast for this upcoming week. We are in the very least going to get a named storm out of this system. Probably in the very least, I should say, I believe maybe a moderate end tropical storm, 45, 50 miles per hour. But I'd say the potential is there that we could see something stronger than that. Maybe even a hurricane for the Gulf Coast sometime later this week. I'm not sure how much stronger than that. And I know that there's some models that are kind of going wild in the possibilities with this storm. And I'll show you, not just with all the models, but especially with some of the ensembles of certain models are really going crazy and showing some interesting solutions. I kind of doubt that, but I do think that things could get interesting here for the Gulf Coast for the next few days. And I said I do believe that especially when we talked about 91L yesterday, I said that there is a potential for a surprise for the Gulf this weekend, and it looks like that surprise is coming to fruition. So we have our hands very full today. So I hope you guys are comfortable, seated. And hopefully you have your seatbelts on because we are about to go for quite a ride on today's discussion. And if you enjoy what you see today, I really appreciate if you will subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell because we are going to have a lot for you in the coming days with whatever shapes up here with Tropical Depression 2. And also make sure to follow me on Twitter as well. And I will show you my Twitter page later on. So if you want to follow me there, you'll know where to look. So, with that being said, long intro aside, let's get started today by taking a look at the National Hurricane Center right now. We have Tropical Depression 2 in the Gulf of Mexico or America. They both are. We're both talking about the same, body of ocean here. So I think you guys all know what I mean, but I'll go with Gulf of Mexico. All right, that's what I'm going to call it from now on. Still, the Gulf of Mexico. And some people will be mad. Why not just call it the Gulf of America? It's just really confusing for me, especially as a tropical tracker, in which I've always known the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of Mexico for my entire time of tracking for several years now. Probably at least since I believe 2017 is when I started tracking the tropics, and I've known it as the Gulf of Mexico for my entire time. So it's kind of hard for me to get used to the idea of calling it Gulf of America, and it's not for any political reasons or anything like that. It's kind of hard for me to, get adjusted to a new name, especially when I've known something as something else for such a long time. But that being aside, Tropical Depression 2 here in the Gulf of Mexico, maximum sustained winds right now are 30 miles per hour, minimum central pressure of 1,011 millibars located at 28.0 north and 85.3 west, and this is stalled pretty much. It's moving at 2 miles per hour, but it is nearly stalled right now. And you know how the deal is with these stalled systems. There almost always is a headache in the track. A lot of uncertainty. Is it going to go this way? Is it going to go that way? That's just the deal. That's just kind of how the deal is many of the times when we are dealing with a stalled system. And that kind of segues into one of the first points I want to talk about today. And that is, there will be lots of uncertainty, and there still is quite a bit of uncertainty right now with the track of the depression. And that really is a headache, especially because depending on where this track will change its landfall location and its potential for intensity. So there's a lot of uncertainties here, and I'm going to try to break them down as much as I possibly can today, but just keep that in mind. Probably the overarching theme is multiple different scenarios, and in general, we're just going to have to keep an eye out on things very closely here over the next several days. And let's start there, by the way, actually. Let's actually start off by taking a look at the track of Tropical Depression 2 right now. And you could see the first impression I'm pretty sure a lot of you have. Well, that is a quite large track. And yes, it is quite a large track, a cone of uncertainty, as I should say. The official National Hurricane Center forecast track is that this will move on off to the northwest and then eventually bend off to the west here. So more than likely right now, in the very least, we are probably looking at a Louisiana landfall from the depression here. But the biggest uncertainty is, when will the bend towards a straight westerly motion happen? Will it happen more towards the north, and because of that we end up getting a landfall closer towards eastern Louisiana and Mississippi? Or does the system immediately move on off to the west and potentially miss just to the south of Louisiana? And that puts areas as far west as Texas at play. And the cone of uncertainty stretches all the way from western Florida here to southern Texas. So pretty much the entire Gulf Coast is in the cone of uncertainty. And I think this is a good time to highlight the cone of uncertainty means all the potential area in which we could see the track of this storm, not the cone representing where the impacts will be. The impacts are completely separate. And talking about impacts, we have tropical storm watches up in effect already for western Florida, and I'll show you where the watches are up in effect for in just a moment. But I do want to remind you once again, the cone of uncertainty represents the uncertainty of the track, not the coverage and expansiveness of the impacts like the wind and things like that. So keep that in mind here when you look at this track, and especially if you are along the Texas coast here, and again stretching anywhere from southern Texas all the way to western Florida, you are in the cone of uncertainty. So you should be watching things very closely here with how Tropical Depression 2 evolves. And I think that is the first point, besides the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty, the next point after that is anywhere from Texas, even southern Texas, all the way up till western Florida should watch and prepare and keep in mind the possibility that you might see a direct landfall in your area. But especially with where exactly this will track, then that'll also start to affect other things like rainfall and just how bad the impacts will be for you and potential intensity. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind here, and I'll again break it down as we go on throughout the live discussion here. And don't worry, I'm gonna try to cover everything as much as I possibly can, and might take a little bit of a while. We might be here for at least an hour or so, but you know what? That is what I am here for. But as I mentioned before, tropical storm watches are in effect. So let's go over that really quickly. The summaries of the watches and warnings in effect from Ocholocanoe River to the Florida-Alabama border. I'm going to try to work on my pronunciation here of some of these towns, especially in northwestern Florida, which seemingly have kind of indigenous roots, and admittedly sometimes those names are kind of hard to pronounce, but If you are in this town here or near this area all the way to the Florida-Alabama border, you are in a tropical storm watch right now. So that is something to keep in mind as you are already under the risk for impacts. So, with that being said, let's take a look at how Tropical Depression 2 is looking like right now, and definitely is an interesting looking system. First of all, what I do want to point out is that it does already have quite a decent, structure here. You can almost already see these kind of curling bands beginning to develop. And that's probably the most interesting aspect of this storm for me right now, is the fact that the structure and the groundwork is already laid out. Even though convection is kind of anemic right now, and you kind of have spotty convection here. And this is still dealing with dry air, which definitely entrained into the system a little bit this morning. And when I first woke up, admittedly, I kind of looked at this and thought, maybe will this develop? Maybe this won't. But then a few hours later, the National Hurricane Center designated this. So that erased any sort of uncertainty as to whether or not we would actually get development from this. Immediately, I knew we are dealing with a developing storm here. But either way, even though we don't have very aggressive convection right now, we definitely have a solid low-level structure. And in fact, taking a look at the 850 millibar vorticity map from University of Wisconsin website, I love using this map, and you can see why. The structure here of Tropical Depression 2, well, you have that round circular look that you typically look for when it comes to vorticity. Definitely the look of a developing tropical system, and that definitely looks like a system that is already well organized in the low levels. So I guess the fact that this has pretty decent convection, even though it's kind of anemic right now, and definitely a good low-level structure, well, already two major checkpoints needed for tropical cyclone classification. So we got it. And we now, because of that, already have Tropical Depression 2 here. And taking a look at its current environmental conditions right now, even though we have dry air, wind shear is definitely not a problem with it, which is probably why its structure was kind of able to maintain itself and hold together quite well. But wind shear right now is in the Gulf is pretty low, especially right over the top of Tropical Depression 2 here. Wind shear values as low as 5 to 10 knots. So absolutely low enough indeed for tropical cyclone development to occur. And of course, we got it. And interestingly enough, right now, throughout the entire Gulf right now, wind shear is definitely on the lower side as well. So wind shear, at least for the next few hours here to at least the next day or two, will not be an issue. And then beyond that, it gets a little bit tricky, and it will really depend on how well Tropical Depression 2 is able to consolidate with the low wind shear it has right now. And of course, the very, very warm sea surface temperatures, which is something that I've been talking about for at least a week now, probably since the beginning of this week. I've been talking about just how warm sea surface temperatures are here in the northern Gulf. And right now, with the anomalies, they still are, for the most part, at least a degree Celsius above normal. And how that's reflected in the actual sea surface temperatures here, well, pretty much throughout the entire northern Gulf, we have sea surface temperature readings at least 29 to 30 degrees Celsius, with even some pockets of 31 degrees Celsius. So low wind shear, very warm SSTs, automatically two very positive signals for development of Tropical Depression 2. And that's why I said that I do believe that we're going to get a surprise here, and we definitely cannot rule out development in the Gulf this weekend because of those very warm sea surface temperatures. And, well, definitely played a role into getting quick development of the depression that we are now tracking this morning. So, how are all of these things going to come together over the next few days? With that being said, let's switch on over to the models here, and this is when things really start to get tricky. So, starting off here with the European ensembles, and this was really kind of the surprise, the first surprise, in my opinion, of this morning, and that is the European ensembles are definitely much more aggressive, as you could see, than the last few days. And it's quite interesting because the operational models, as in the non-AI models, were, interestingly enough, always much less aggressive on development of what is now Tropical Depression 2 than the AI models were. But now looks like all of the models are starting to latch on today, and the European ensembles here, pretty decent spread. And this is kind of the other overall, overarching theme of how things are looking like with Tropical Depression 2 right now. You first have an envelope here on the north side of ensembles that are generally weaker, and obviously still develop this storm because, well, it has developed now, but the ensembles here that more or less move towards the northeastern and north central Gulf coasts, so anywhere from eastern Louisiana to Florida, you could definitely see that most of those ensembles are on the weaker side and, don't get the storm as strong as, for instance, the ensembles here that especially move Tropical Depression 2 more towards the west and towards the south, and completely avoid Louisiana. In fact, some of the ensembles here are so strong, if you could look closely here, we literally see some ensembles of the European showing pressure in the 930. So we even have a handful of major hurricane ensembles here in the northwestern Gulf. And that is quite interesting. Do I think that that's going to happen? Probably not. But I do think it definitely tells us, a story, or it gives us an idea of what the general pattern will be. So we kind of have that idea down. Let's see if it carries on throughout the rest of the models. The FNV3, the Google AI ensembles, also aggressive this morning and showing quite a strong aggressive solution again, especially with the ensembles here that stay to the south of Louisiana, and then the more northerly ensembles stay more north and go into eastern Louisiana or the northern Gulf Coast, end up much weaker. And then the European AI ensembles, definitely a lot of them do develop, but interestingly enough, I guess you could say that they're not necessarily as aggressive as both the European and the Google AI ensembles are, especially with the more westerly and southerly solutions. But honestly, if you look here and if you really want to kind of pick out the pattern, still the ensembles that are stronger are more towards the south and the west as well. So that seems to be another theme, is the more Tropical Depression 2 moves on off to the north here, and more towards the central and eastern Gulf Coast, the less likely it is going to be strong, and the more likely it is just going to be a weak storm, and probably, not be too much of a headache compared to the ensembles here that more or less move on off to the west straight away and end up getting into the central and western Gulf. Well, it'll have much more time over water, so much more time to intensify, and of course, because of that, much more time over, of course, the very, very warm sea surface temperatures that we have here throughout the entirety of the northern Gulf. And of course, there's another aspect too, which I'll talk about in just a moment too, especially as it relates to wind shear, which will obviously have an impact on the intensity of this storm as well. So now let's go to the actual regular models to kind of break things down, starting off with the GFS here. And you can see what the GFS does. Definitely is more leaning towards the northerly, weaker solution here, and you can see this storm definitely develops, and it is already once again developed, but the GFS kind of keeps this on a more northerly, northwesterly trajectory, and pretty much throughout the entire time here, this Tropical Depression 2 remains weak, and almost pretty much begins to fizzle out as it approaches the Gulf Coast, near Louisiana and Mississippi. And then once it moves inland, it just completely dissipates. Although, probably the main structure dissipates, but we'll probably still have rainfall from whatever happens here. And that's also another impact that I'll go over in just a little bit, the rainfall. But you can see, going back to the ensembles here, again, the two ideas represented, the more northerly solutions are weaker, and of course, that idea is being reflected here on the GFS. So it's kind of nice to see how all of the models kind of, converge on certain ideas, if you understand what I'm saying. The European as well, the operational European, also kind of showing that, although I guess it's a little bit stronger than the GFS, so maybe the GFS is kind of overdoing things, maybe with shear or something like that. But the European also, with the northerly solution, showing a weaker storm than the model that I'm about to show you in a little bit, but I guess still slightly stronger than the GFS, so I guess maybe there's a little bit of a difference between the models in terms of environmental factors. So let's actually take a look at that really quickly here. Let's switch to the 200 millibar wind, and you can see why whatever does develop and moves on a more northerly trajectory here dissipates, especially as it gets towards the north central Gulf Coast. Because if you look at the wind shear, at least on the GFS, right near the Gulf Coast, we start seeing a lot stronger wind shear with, of course, a much weaker system. So anything that does run into the wind shear will more than likely dissipate and struggle much quicker, obviously resulting in a much weaker outcome. And then the European also shows that solution, although as I expected, and seemingly, kind of obvious between looking at the two models here, the European obviously shows less wind shear, still not as optimal because we're still kind of dealing with a strong overall, wind movement coming out of the northeast, so that's still northerly shear over the storm, so kind of keeping a lid on overall potential intensity, and at most this would probably yield us a moderate tropical storm before once again moving onshore in either eastern Louisiana or Mississippi here, and then that moves on off and probably is inland by the time we get to Wednesday. Comparing that to the AI model, the European AI, which we'll use as an example here, and you can see immediately we have a very different solution. The European AI develops Tropical Depression 2 and consolidates it much quicker, and because of that, it ends up moving to the south. And instead of moving towards the central Gulf Coast and eastern Louisiana, it ends up going to the south of Louisiana. Maybe it clips the far southern portion here of Louisiana, but it ends up moving on off to the south and eventually kind of, it does move on off to the south and then moves on a straight westerly direction with eventually a kind of slight southwesterly bend. And the European AI model ends up taking this straight into southern Texas versus the GFS and the Euro, which brought this into the central Gulf Coast here and then immediately had it move inland by the time we got to Wednesday. And most importantly, the European AI definitely has a stronger solution here. Let's see how strong of a storm it shows. Roughly 997 millibars, so that's definitely a stronger solution than what the European and definitely the GFS had. But given the resolution of the European AI, since it is a slightly lower resolution model, I would not be surprised if this is actually the European AI showing, near hurricane intensity by this time. But it goes back to the idea here that I outlined before. A more weaker storm takes a more northerly direction and ends up moving towards the central Gulf Coast, while a stronger storm moves on a more westerly trajectory and ends up moving towards the western Gulf. So you could already see those two scenarios, playing out in all of the models, and that's definitely something that we will have to keep an eye out here over the next few days. And I think it starts with seeing just how much consolidation we're going to see of Tropical Depression 2 within the next day or so. Are we going to start seeing a lot more deep convection, which will, kind of centralize the, structure here? Because as I said before, Tropical Depression 2 already has a pretty decent structure, and definitely one that, how do I explain it? First of all, you can kind of already see an S shape if you, really know how to look, and if you're really creative. If you kind of draw, an S through the structure of Tropical Depression 2 here, it definitely looks like a pretty decent S shape already. And so that, again, tells me that we already have a decent structure with this storm. And definitely, if we're able to get a lot of deep convection and this storm is able to fight off the dry air that's to the north of it, especially if that happens tomorrow when we reach the next diurnal maximum, ocean cycle. That's diurnal maximum. If you're not sure what that means, that's typically during the time of day in which we see the most aggressive convection that is able to blow up on the ocean. And that typically happens around overnight into the early morning hours, as the sun is rising. And so if we're able to get a lot of deep convection to fire off, especially, near the center or over top the center of Tropical Depression 2 here by the time we get to tomorrow morning, that could definitely help position this storm in a much better position in which we could see the stronger solutions verify here, where we end up seeing a more westerly track, and because of that, maybe this has a higher ceiling, and maybe this might potentially be a hurricane, especially for the western Gulf Coast and Texas and Louisiana, western Louisiana specifically. So everyone needs to watch, again, if you're along the northern Gulf Coast, and let's show you here how the upper level winds look like. And you can see definitely a much more favorable look here for Tropical Depression 2 as we get towards the western Gulf Coast. There is a little bit of a northerly shear component. There will be strong shear on the northerly side of this system, but because it's on a more southerly trajectory, I guess it kind of avoids the strongest shear. And then eventually here, as it gets towards the western Gulf, that definitely looks like a pretty decent outflow pattern that develops on the 200 millibar wind. Definitely quite a bit of good outflow on the southern side developing here. And definitely overall, the wind shear is much lower and therefore much favorable for more intensification. So all of the possibilities here that we will have to watch out. And it's going to be a long few days ahead of tracking here in the Gulf. And once again, as I said at the beginning of the video, taking a look at all the possibilities here by looking at the ensembles, all of the ensembles, and of course looking at the National Hurricane Center official forecast track. Again, anywhere from southern Texas all the way to western Florida and Mississippi and Alabama need to be watching this depression here very closely and preparing for the idea that you might get a direct impact in your area. Even if you won't, still prepare for the idea and still watch the tropics very closely here over the next several days. But something else that I do want to highlight, and this map too is definitely going to change, especially depending on where the exact track and intensity of Tropical Depression 2 will be, and of course where it will go. But the rainfall is also going to be an issue as well. And taking a look at the next 7 days here, the expected rainfall already for Florida is going to be pretty high. Some areas expected to see at least up to 5, maybe even half a foot of rain, and even stretching as well throughout the entire Gulf Coast, at least stretching into Louisiana for now. But of course, especially if we see a different track in this, and Tropical Depression 2 here moves on off more to the west and to the south and ends up threatening Texas, you bet that these rainfall totals are definitely going to shift dramatically and probably include lots of Texas as well. And I mean, that's especially important to watch for, given the fact that, Texas has dealt with some flash flooding and some, flood events over the past few weeks here. So I'd imagine, especially if you are in Texas, you should be watching the progress of Tropical Depression 2 here very closely over the next few days. And of course, I bring this up because, as I always say, I do not want to diminish the impact of rainfall that we could possibly see, because rainfall is always the number one impact that people are most caught off guard by. And statistically, rainfall and flooding tends to be the number one killer when it comes to tropical cyclones. And I've said that before, and I will continue to repeat that. So rainfall totals as well, we will be monitoring very closely here over the next few days, and definitely expect rainfall probably for the entire Gulf Coast, even if you don't get any impacts from Tropical Depression 2. What will very likely be Bertha within the next day or so at most. But of course, especially the highest rainfall totals will definitely change and will definitely be very much impacted by whatever track does end up happening, and of course the intensity too of Tropical Depression 2. All right, so found this tweet very interesting, and again, kind of fits into the overall idea here of things that we will very much need to watch here with the trends with Tropical Depression 2. But Andy Hazelton posted this graph when we were still at 91L, so this is a little bit outdated, but I mean, is it really? This is only from 10 o'clock, so only from 2.5 hours ago. But Andy Hazelton does say 91L is further south, and he's talking about the HAFS B model. And he says that 91L further south and west than the operational HAFS shows a possible hurricane threat to the Texas coast, although the system is still battling some shear. So the shear, again, is going to be a very big part of the equation as to what exactly will happen. But he does say, of course, use this with caution since it's not an operational model, and of course always refer to the NHC4 official forecast. And I think anyone with half a brain knows to exactly do that. But interesting, thing that he does mention, 91L, further south and west, potential hurricane threat to the Texas coast. And again, looking back at the ensembles here, and even going back to what the European AI forecasts, I think that follows pretty well in line with the, possibilities that I have outlined today, especially if we see a more south and west track with Tropical Depression 2. Maybe that'll open the door for maybe a stronger storm in the Western Gulf, and especially for Texas and Louisiana if we do see a track towards that area. So lots to keep in mind here over the next few days, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you are going to have questions or comments or concerns. So with that being said, since we are now there, and I guess we've kind of gone over all of the main points that I wanted to go over today so far, I'm now going to open up the chat board to you. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, leave them in the chat board below. I'll be reading any questions or comments you have right now, and if you want me to bring up a model that I've not brought up so far, or if you have any questions about potential impacts to your area, ask away right now. I'll be looking at the chat board. But I will tell you, please keep it civil. Please do not ask me any weird things or anything that might be too suspicious. And if it is really, questionable, I will take, I'm going to have to put my foot down. So please keep in mind about that. But other than that, ask away or comment away. I'll be reading and I'll be watching the chat here. So let's see. Will it become Bertha? Well, it probably will be. The National Hurricane Center track officially has Tropical Depression 2 strengthening into a tropical storm. Let's actually see what the intensity forecast is so far. 60 miles per hour is the current intensity forecast, and I'm pretty sure that this will probably change quite a bit over the next few days here. And of course, we'll see adjustments to maybe something higher or something lower. Again, it all depends on what the track of this depression will be. I'm in New Orleans. Should I be concerned? Yes, you should be. I wouldn't say concerned is the right word, but you absolutely should be watching things very closely here over the next few days. I mean, the current National Hurricane Center track takes this right into eastern Louisiana, and New Orleans is definitely right near the kind of consensus of the center of the track here. So right now, you are definitely within the cone of uncertainty for the potential track. And if you are anywhere in the cone of uncertainty, once again, you absolutely should be watching very closely and preparing, once again, for the idea that you might get a direct landfall. So yes, you should be watching things very closely if you are in New Orleans. And very likely, I wouldn't be surprised if you get tropical storm watches or warnings issued to you not long from now, maybe in a few hours from now, or definitely by tomorrow. I see some watches and warnings being issued for the eastern Louisiana, central Gulf Coast area, probably including New Orleans. So yes, New Orleans is at risk. All right, let's see. It's possible it could also be a major hurricane in the Texas, Louisiana area. I don't rule out that the models from the ensemble show a Category 5 hurricane. I would not go that far. And I wouldn't even go as far to say that we will have a major hurricane from, this depression here. But a hurricane is definitely possible. I would not rule out the chance of a hurricane, especially if this tracks towards the western Gulf. And going back to the ensembles here, once again, it'll definitely hinge upon whether or not we get a more, westerly and southerly track. Now, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about these European ensembles here, some of which show a pressure in the 930s. And I guess you could assume that that's probably a moderate and Cat 4 in the very least, but I'm not necessarily sure that we will get something that strong. Maybe I could be eating my words. I have no idea. But again, it's really going to depend on how things develop right now. But in the very least, given the, aggressiveness of some of these ensembles, especially towards, again, the western Gulf Coast, I would not be surprised if we do see a hurricane out of this system. I think a hurricane is definitely on the table. And I think probably a more reasonable solution would be with what the Google AI ensembles have right now. They don't really have this, becoming a major, but you do see some ensembles here, 60 knots, even some shadings of 70 knots. So high-end tropical storm, low-end hurricane, Category 1. Maybe moderate to high-end Category 1 at, best case scenario for it. Obviously, worst case scenario for, us as humans. But not sure about major hurricane, but definitely a hurricane is a possibility. And definitely not a low chance as well. And I would show all the other hurricane models, like the hurricane-specific models, like the HWRF and the HMON, but I don't think they've loaded yet specifically for Tropical Depression 2, because they were up for when we had Invest 91L, and especially yesterday, a lot of the hurricane models were showing a hurricane from 91L, especially the HMON and the HWRF. They really were aggressive on this storm. And given the trends that we're seeing today with the models, maybe they were onto something. But unfortunately, I can't show the hurricane models right now, or maybe I can. Let's look. Nah, Tropical Depression 2 still not on the hurricane models list right now. So, fortunately, we don't have the hurricane data just yet. But of course, when it is available and when the hurricane models start running specifically for Tropical Depression 2, I'll definitely post them online, and I'll definitely post it to Twitter. And actually, with that being said, if you want to follow me for updates, especially throughout the day, and probably much more consistent updates, make sure to follow me on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. If you haven't already done so, at Danilo Evangelista. We're at 712 followers right now. We've been going up in followers over the last few days. So thank you to all of those who have followed me. And if you are a follower from Twitter and you're seeing me on YouTube, glad to have you along. Glad to have you along supporting both of my channels here. So big thanks to all of you. And if you are right now watching on YouTube and you're not yet followed or you're not yet following me on Twitter, go ahead and do so. Again, at Danilo Evangelista, and I will be posting a lot of things. I'll be posting whenever I do videos or live streams, and I'll also be posting updates on whenever we get new updates from the National Hurricane Center, reposting people like Andy Hazelton. So definitely doing a lot of things here on Twitter, so please make sure to follow me there if you haven't already done so. I don't see a lot of questions or comments here, so if you guys don't have any questions, I will wrap this up in a little bit. But definitely a very interesting storm that we will be monitoring. And I should say, this does go to show that even though we are in an El Nino this year, lots of talk about El Nino, shutting down hurricane season, and the fact that we're going to have more than likely a below normal hurricane season this year, that does not prevent systems like what we are seeing with Tropical Depression 2 right now from coming out of the woodwork and pulling a surprise and still bringing some impacts to land. Even though the overall season is going to be below normal, does not stop individual storms from still being impactful. So keep in mind, once again, every time we have an El Nino, does not, even if we have a below normal season, that does not guarantee no impacts and, no need to worry about the tropics, because obviously we have a threat on our hands here over the next few days, and we are right now in a El Nino, in fact, a very strong one. So definitely another point to be proven. With that as well. All right. A tropical storm warning, a tropical storm watch, and coastal flooding may be issued for the northern coastal area, with severe weather bulletins may also be issued. Yes, we're probably going to get all of those things over the next few days as we find out more about the potential impacts here from Tropical Depression 2. And again, as I said before, we already have tropical storm watches in effect right now for the western Florida Peninsula coastline, and that's probably going to get extended further west into Mississippi, Alabama, and probably eastern Louisiana, and of course New Orleans, like somebody asked about earlier. So definitely have quite a bit of impacts and things to talk about from the watches and warning standpoint coming over the next few days. And of course, especially because we're going to be talking about a landfall here. So yes, all of those things are coming. All right, so since there don't seem to be many more questions being aimed my way right now, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I'll stay on for a minute longer, but if not, I'm probably going to wrap things up. Again, if you have any questions or comments, comment on YouTube below, or if you want to keep monitoring things throughout the day, follow me on Twitter once again. And of course, I should say, if you want to follow things on your own merit and you don't want to be reliant on me, go to the National Hurricane Center website, nhc.noaa.gov. It is free, fully free. I promise you this website is fully free. It's paid for with our tax dollars. So utilize it. Utilize what your taxes pay for, you know? And of course, tropical tidbits as well if you want to follow the models or follow the satellite images here. Tropical tidbits as well, which I should say, by the way, is run and operated by Dr. Levi Cowan, who does his own tropical updates on YouTube and Twitter, and he's more knowledgeable than me. So if you want a more knowledgeable perspective, although I think I'm pretty knowledgeable, but if you want a more knowledgeable perspective and someone who can really break it down very well, make sure to follow Levi Cowan as well, giving a shout out to him because he does quite a bunch of incredible things as well. So make sure to follow him as well. What is the name of the tropical system in the Western Pacific? I'm not really on top of the Pacific right now, especially the Western Pacific, but I will get back to you on that. And when do we know when a Category 2 hurricane will develop in the Pacific? I have no idea, but I do know that a few new depressions have formed in the Eastern Pacific today, and probably more coming over the next week or so. So I guess we have a chance there at seeing a Category 2 in the Pacific. All right. With that being said, I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your day. Again, I'll have more updates throughout the day. I'm probably going to post a video update very shortly after this. And then I'll probably have another update later in the evening. And of course, we will go over all of the new watches and warnings and all of the new models that'll come out. So make sure to stay tuned. And if you want to stay tuned and you haven't already done so, please make sure to follow me on Twitter, subscribe to me on YouTube, and turn on the notification bell so you can get videos and everything the moment I upload them. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And I will definitely talk with you guys again very soon.